sinners and saints. Dust off those horns and halos. It's time for Alan After Dark.
Have you ever hooked up with a guy? You're fooling around, the foreplay's getting hot and heavy, when they suddenly start talking and you realize that they're quoting from a porn you've seen. I'm telling you, it was almost as awkward as that time I was fooling around with a guy. I was pulling down his jeans and a dryer sheet fell out. Now, don't get me wrong. I have nothing against having clean clothes, but it does make it very awkward when you look up and you have a dryer sheet dangling from your lips. For a second, I thought about pretending like I had dental floss, but that seemed like the most inopportune time to floss your teeth. But anyway, we're in the first episode of this podcast, and I've already taken the train off the tracks. Welcome to Alan After Dark. I'm your host, Alan, and I am so excited to be here with you today. I want to give a special shout out to Jacob of the Watch Your Spaghetti Policy podcast. He has been a great friend, very helpful with giving me advice on how to get Alan After Dark started, not only on the technology, but giving me the encouragement to have the guts to actually do this thing. It isn't easy when you get down to it, when you're sitting here in a room talking about things with nobody to bounce it off exactly, other than the thoughts that you're all listening and hopefully getting something from it. I also want to shout out to my favorite bartender, John, who is a great friend and may have a tremendous amount of influence on this podcast, especially if I'm recording an episode on a day after visiting Core, my favorite club bar in town. So shout out, John. Let me give you an introduction to myself. My name is Alan, of course, your host, born and raised in Tennessee, but don't hold that against me. I can be best described as a person with a face that is perfect for podcasting and radio. I guess physically you could describe me as a middle-aged gay bear, but that is okay as well. I don't mind being called middle-aged. I didn't get this old by being stupid. Oh, that reminds me of a time when this young twink one time was very irritated by me. I'm not sure exactly why, just because I was there probably. And he said, "You need to act your age." And I was like, "What do you mean act my age? How do you know what my age is and how I should act at your age, you tadpole?" But anyway, I digress. So in this first episode of Alan After Dark, I guess you could say it's about the sexual adventures and misadventures of a single, middle-aged gay bear trying to make his way through life in a crazy, crazy world. And having said that, let's take a walk down memory lane to where it all began. A lot of people find it surprising, but I really knew that I was different by the age of 5. I had no words for it. I didn't have a definition. I didn't know what gay meant. I just knew that I didn't look at things the same way as other people did, in particular boys, even though at that age, most of us aren't thinking about things other than our toys and birthdays, Christmas, holidays, and summer break, spring break, those kinds of things. It really wasn't until I was 13 when I actually figured it out. And let me just say this before we get started. When I tell some of my stories from the past, I will just say that names will be changed to protect the guilty. So, I was 13 years old on the school bus, and I was a freshman in high school at that time. And our bus going to school was extremely crowded that particular day. And we shall call his name Grady Thomas. He was forced to stand up instead of finding a seat, which was allowed back in those days. Yes, it was a bus, it was not a wagon. So, anyway, he elected to stand right where I was sitting with his groin right at my shoulder. Now, he was 2 years older than me. He had facial hair, and he just seemed so much more masculine than the other boys in school. And it was the first time that I'd really paid attention. Now, granted, it was most likely because I had never been that close to another boy's groin, crotch area in my life. And I was beyond intrigued. I was aroused. And then suddenly the bus took a hard curve and he jolted forward and his groin pressed against my shoulder. Once the bus finished the curve, he could have pushed himself away, but he kept rubbing his groin against my shoulder. And I just sat there and kind of side-eyed the whole situation. And it finally dawned on me that the word I was looking for to explain this difference that I felt was that I was gay. That was the word. And for me, it was this sense of freedom, this sudden epiphany that came over me that told me this is who you are. And it was thanks to Grady and this sexual, non-sexual encounter that made me see the light. What's interesting is that at the same time, my best friend, who was a girl, she's the funniest person I had ever known up until that point. And she had made no secret that she had feelings for me that were beyond the friendship level that we had. And it was just a few days later that I told her that I was gay. And being the great girl that she was, she sat there and she thought about it for a few minutes. And then she says, well, at least I can talk to you about guys now. So even then, I was one of the lucky ones who had a supportive friend who I could talk to. Now, I want to be honest here too. That was rare. I was very, very lucky to have someone who wasn't blinded by religion or just their hatred of anything that was different. I was lucky to fall into the right hands of a supportive person. That isn't always the case. And in fact, I had two different English teachers in high school in front of the class. The subject of homosexuality was brought up, and both of them described it as disgusting, anti-God perversions that should not even be talked about. And I kept thinking that was English teachers. I could not understand. I just assumed that English teachers, for some stupid reason, would not be as prejudiced and bigoted about something that they didn't even understand. And there was also, all the times the fear that you would look the wrong way or say something the wrong way that would out you to people who really wanted to do you harm. And if you had teachers who would not be supportive, that made you even a larger target to bullies and bigots, not only in the locker room, but in the restroom, even sometimes in the hallways. You just never knew what might happen. And the presumption that people were level-headed and intelligent enough to understand differences goes out the window once you've gotten burned a few times, especially by a teacher that you should be able to respect and confide in. And so after that close encounter of the dick kind, I really become aware of other boys and looking at them in the context of sexuality, of a physical being that I was drawn to. And being raised in a Baptist church where everything is a sin, well, let me back up on that just for a second there. everything in the Baptist church is a sin, and you can be a morality judge up until you get caught. If you never get caught, you've never committed a sin. So, in essence, when you're doing things and you never get caught, you've not committed a sin. It's only a sin when you get caught. Just, a fact. Use it as you wish. So I became really aware of boys and sexuality at that time. And while it may seem counterintuitive, the place that I was most excited about, even though it could be the most dangerous, and perhaps that was part of the intrigue, was the locker room. And watching the boys changing their clothes, taking their clothes off, and seeing them in their underwear. It really was a different thing when I become aware of who I was, and that there were natural instincts that draw you to sexual expression. And there was a guy, we'll call him Miles. He had this habit of basically playing with his dick all the time. And it seemed to be more prevalent in the locker room. And he just seemed like wherever he was, though, in the hallways, in class, even in church, he couldn't keep his hands off his dick. But one day in particular, in the locker room, we were changing. We were going to be playing volleyball, I think, that day. And we were changing, and most of us were in our tighty-whities. And he always caught my gaze as we're changing. And that day, it seemed like he was going to just jack off through his underwear. And it just seemed like I was the only one who noticed it. It was the strangest thing to me that I'm seeing this guy just pulling and tugging on his dick to a point of release that was beyond me. I guess I didn't understand that. And I guess I need to clarify that too. I didn't really truly understand what masturbation connected with when it came to sex. Even at that time, I just knew that it felt really good. And I had discovered masturbation at a very young age, even before puberty. And I just knew that it felt really good and I really enjoyed it. And seeing Miles pulling on his happy place, I knew that he was probably going to feel the same feeling that I felt, but he was doing it in front of all these guys who didn't seem to be even aware of it. And this is one of the things that I learned at that point, that certain people could do things and be accepted, and other people could do the same thing and be ostracized, condemned, and basically treated like trash, for lack of a better thought right now as I'm recording this. And that's how I identified with the difference, that even people who may not know, they sense something that's different, and they sense something different in me that they did not sense in Miles. And so he's standing there, they're talking, he is basically jacking off, and none of the guys even seem to notice it. Now, Miles was an absolutely sexy, good-looking guy. Jet black hair, blue eyes, built great, and he had this extra charisma that came along with his having the guts, I guess, to play with himself in front of other people, even adults. He seem to keep his hands off his dick. And oftentimes I noticed that he was noticing me looking at him. And at that point, I think that I kind of honed those skills, improved them to where I could pick out guys in almost every situation when they would be touching themselves. And it was just a fetish that developed in me, that developed years later into watching pro baseball and watching these hot players rearranging their cups and touching themselves on a ball field. And I'm like, they're touching themselves on national television. And I was like, damn, how come I can't do that? You know? And so I kind of realized then that there seemed to be personality traits in the guys who did play with themselves quite frequently in those situations. And I started developing this sort of instinctual method of survival where I could feel my sexuality by looking at others, but do it in a way that I knew I wouldn't get in trouble. And when I say in trouble, I mean disciplined by a teacher, bullied by someone, threatened or even beaten up by someone based on what they might have assumed about me, but could never catch me. So even in the locker room when we were changing clothes, I was good at looking and not being caught, at least in my mind. But I guess for all intents and purposes, had I been caught, there were several guys that had they caught me, they would have immediately attacked me, accused me of looking at them, and would have either tried to beat me up or run to a teacher and tell on me. And since that never happened, I have to assume that either I was never caught or I was caught and they didn't mind that I was watching. So either way, I came out through that whole situation without ever getting busted for checking them out. And I do wonder sometimes if maybe I was more mature than some of my classmates. You know, I had discovered the pleasures of my penis at a very young age. I knew how to touch myself in a way that gave me pleasure. And perhaps some of them, despite having all the characteristics, maybe they did not really realize, like I did at first, what it meant. I mean, not all of us mature at the same time frame. We don't see things the same way. We're all unique in our own special patterns. So maybe all of this, their behavior was from a place of innocence, which I'm sure is a possibility. But I do believe that once you discover the built-in pleasures your body has, it's hard to put that genie back in a bottle, I believe. And why would you want to put that genie back in the bottle anyway? I mean, it feels good. Damn, does it feel good? I mean, jacking off is one of the best feelings ever created by nature. It is just an amazing feeling. I mean, just talking about it makes me tongue-tied almost, because that feeling is beyond description, is it not? When you hit orgasm and that rush, that burst, I mean, it is just the greatest pleasure I can think of, other than maybe eating shrimp and lobster, but we'll talk about that later as well. So why would you want to suppress it? I guess that all stems from the other aspects of life, i.e. religion and parental guilt. If your parents believe in certain religious aspects of the Bible, they may impress upon you that touching yourself is a really bad thing. It's dirty, it's dangerous, it's nasty, it's sinful. And if your parents have your attention, your respect and appreciation, it's hard to push back against all of that pressure from them just for something as simple as pleasuring yourself. But I guess I'm lucky. I never had those feelings of guilt. It's probably why I named this podcast Alan After Dark. It's because I really relish the dark side. I really relish the thought that maybe it was taboo, that it was a sin in their eyes, because I knew that it wasn't a sin, that it was what I was supposed to appreciate And I was allowed to do. I was allowed to explore and enjoy the pleasures that my own body gives. Seriously, what harm am I doing to anybody else if I masturbate? For goodness sake, it is something so genuinely personal that it's almost as intimate with oneself as it would be kissing someone else. Now, I know a lot of you will disagree with that. That's fine. But I'm just thinking about it holistically under the influence of religion and parental pressure to conform to maybe their own dogma that they were raised with that said these things were bad. And because they couldn't do it, they feel the need to impress upon their own children. Even though I wonder if they realized the reality of the teenage years as time goes by, that everything that you rail against, your kids are probably going to try it. I certainly wanted to. Now, granted, I was a good boy. I was considered an all-American boy. You know, the ones that they want to put on a poster, even though I kind of look like Uncle Fester even from the young age. Actually, I look like Uncle Fester with hair, even though people say I look really cute now when they look back at those pictures. No, I wasn't. I totally was a twink with my feathered hair and the hairspray and all those good things. But I am really lucky that I was able to go beyond all those pressures, all the ugliness from other people, and grow to love myself even more for being able to accept me, warts and all, and sexuality and all, and come through to be a wild and crazy grown-up man who absolutely loves life. Thank you for joining me on this, the first episode of Alan After Dark. I know it was a bit preachy, but I promise you the party is just getting started, and we are in for one hell of a roller coaster ride. Come back and see me, go out and have some fun, grab a cocktail, or maybe some cock, and take the night by the balls. Have a good night. We'll see you soon. Thank you.